The V10 is Powkiddy's latest addition to the vertical retro emulation console market. A market that is already saturated, Powkiddy have tried to stand out by making the V10 a little less vertical and a bit more chubby. However, can the odd-looking V10 provide a solid emulation experience, and do its funny looks actually make it more pocketable than its competition? I've been using the Powkiddy V10 exclusively as my #1 console for the past week to answer these questions, and this is what happened. I'm going to be honest, I'm not usually a fan of Powkiddy. I find their consoles always leave me with a bit to be desired. The designs seem a bit odd or the quality feels a bit off. However, I'm always open to giving them a chance, as I think more competition for Anbernic and Retroid is good. When I first saw the V10, I wasn't that excited. It looked like yet another slightly different vertical retro console that could probably emulate up to PS1 and no further. Essentially, I was right, but that's not really the whole story. When I first opened the V10 box, I noticed that the build quality visually appeared better than I was expecting. A solid looking screen with a nice translucent black case. The V10 reminds me more of a 2022 Anbernic console than a Powkiddy, and I mean that in a good way. Anbernic have moved on their designs to include RGB lighting and unique shapes. However, Anbernic originally had a standard style of blockier and simpler looking designs. I personally like the new Anbernic look, however some gamers will prefer that more subtle, understated look, and it looks like Powkiddy is now filling that spot. The V10 looks like a console that is designed with functionality in mind over flashy style, and I do appreciate that, especially in a more pocketable device. Picking up the V10 and I continue to be nicely surprised. Like I said in the past, I felt Powkiddy devices were a bit flimsy in the hands and didn't give that feeling of quality. However, the well-balanced weight, solid feeling, and smoothness of the matte plastic really felt like Powkiddy have paid attention to these details. It feels good in the hands too. The fact that the V10 is stubbier doesn't actually take away from the ergonomics. In some ways, it adds to it. Your hands are in the position they will be normally for a vertical console, there's just a bit more space near the bottom of your hands. But with the V10 being stubbier, it means the buttons are slightly higher than a traditional vertical console, which for me makes it easier to access the buttons. Furthermore, the V10 has shoulder buttons similar to most modern vertical handhelds. The 3x4 screen is great too. A solid 3.5 inch IPS, which is perfect for emulation up to and including the PS1 generation. Switching on the V10 and it powered up with Arc OS 2.0, a decent Linux OS with a user interface I really like. The kind that makes this really feel like a dedicated gaming handheld as opposed to another fancy Android device. I was really pleased to see that the SD card it came with was packed with games too. The PS1 library was bigger than you usually get, so I jumped right in to find some of my favourite games. Unfortunately, the one game I really wanted to play, Tenchu, wasn't available, so I had to load my own copy of it. This was a simple process of uploading Tenchu to the SD using my laptop and putting it back in the V10. Tenchu played brilliantly on the Powkiddy V10 and gave me the nostalgia hit I was looking for. The screen and controls of the V10 work brilliantly for PS1 gaming and really amplify the immersion of playing PS1 games in handheld mode. One thing I did struggle with, however, was figuring out how to turn the volume up and down. This was a bit of an issue, especially as I wanted to play some Tenchu in bed, something my wife wasn't too impressed with. I carried on playing some more Tenchu as I went to bed, albeit quite loudly, and then put the V10 into sleep mode. Sleep mode can be a bit hit and miss on retro handhelds, but I was really pleased to see that when I woke up in the morning, the V10 jumped straight back into Tenchu where I'd left it, and had hardly lost any battery at all. The next day I was playing around with the V10 trying to do a save state, and realised I didn't have a clue what to do. Usually these devices have a menu button or something to bring up the options, as well as a clear volume control. The thing I thought was a volume control, the plus and minus buttons, turned out not to be. However, after playing around a bit, I stumbled upon some functionality. Holding down the minus button and pressing different buttons perform different functions like save and load states. Holding down the plus button and using the D-pad controls the volume. A bit finicky and not ideal, as it seems a bit too easy to hit the save or load state functions. Plus, it probably would have been a lot easier to figure out if I just looked at the manual, but who does that? Either way, I figured out what I needed to know, which made the rest of the week a lot easier and less noisy for my wife. By day 3 I was finding myself not that drawn to the V10. I don't think it's the device itself, as I have no real complaints. I think it's more a symptom of the saturation of the market, especially with handhelds of this style and power. I fancied starting a new career on Gran Turismo, however the version that came with the device didn't load properly when playing simulation mode. Arcade mode worked fine, but I wanted to get into something a bit more juicy than just a few arcade laps. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 3 worked well and runs really smoothly, but I did find it really hard to win. As comfortable as the controls feel on the V10, I think Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 3 showed where they may be lacking. It might be the game itself, as it has been a long time since I played the game on native hardware. However, getting the right feeling to control a Ferrari flying through village streets didn't quite work out. A game that did work brilliantly was Crash Team Racing. Crash Team Racing is one of my favourite games on the PS1 and entertained me plenty back in the days when I was waiting for a PS2. Loading Crash Team Racing on the V10 felt as good and played as well as I remember it on the PS1. The screen and controls really feel like a great match for Crash Team Racing, and this was the first time through the week that it really felt right playing the Powkiddy V10. Crash Team Racing was so enjoyable in fact that it made up the majority of the rest of my game time with the V10, to the point where I was now looking forward to my work breaks to crank out a few more CTR races. Now, Crash Team Racing and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 3 both being PlayStation 1 games but feeling so different seemed a bit weird to me to start with, but I think I nailed it down. I think Crash Team Racing is more an arcadey game, and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 3, although arcade, is a bit more simulation. And I think for a device like this, arcade games work the best, and I think this is why Crash Team Racing felt so much different. The V10 is a really interesting console. A device that seems just like another generic Powkiddy handheld with a slightly different shaped body. However, the chubby style of the V10 really make it a great pocketable device, something that is unique considering the screen size it comes with. I feel like the V10 is more in the leagues of the RG28XX pocketability than the RG35XX, even though it shares a screen size with the latter. In terms of 3.5-inch screens, I actually think the V10 is my favourite when it comes to pocketability and discrete playing. Thanks hugely to a great screen, really well designed controls, solid build quality and great retro feel. A retro handheld I was initially dubious about, I'm pleased to say that the Powkiddy V10 has been a great surprise. But if 3.5 isn't big enough for you, and you're looking for an even bigger screen with the same great build quality and retro feel, then check out the RG40XX right here.